Okay, so good morning, everyone from Manila, and good afternoon to you all there. First of all, I would like to thank. First of all, I would like to thank the Sydney Southeast Asia Center for this opportunity to share on the Philippines from 2021 and leading to 2022. So my presentation this morning on 2021 Philippine updates revolves around two main themes. First would be the continuing threat of COVID-19 and related issues to it, such as pandemic corruption. And second would be the preparations and issues leading up to the May 2022 elections. I chose to focus on these two groups of issues, the pandemic and the elections, since these two also affect the state of politics in the country this 2022. So from 2021, they continue to affect the state of politics in our country. So to begin, for the most part, 2021 was a year wherein the Philippines continued to grapple with the threat of COVID-19. With many problems left unresolved from 2020, such as the need for sufficient health facilities, increased and more accessible testing, adequate social assistance to poor Filipinos, and coherent policies from key decision makers, the surge of the more infectious COVID-19 Delta variant in August 2021 further exposed the weaknesses and near collapse of our already frail healthcare system, much to the frustration of many. It was not until November 2021 when cases began to dip, restrictions started to loosen up, and Filipinos began to see what a new normal looks like. However, this did not last too long. Many places in the country had to go under lockdown again with the Omicron variant surge in early 2022. So this has been the cycle in the Philippines all throughout the pandemic. We go on lockdown, we loosen up, and then we go on another lockdown, and the cycle goes on. But at present, restrictions are relatively loose because cases have stayed relatively low as compared to the surges of the Delta and Omicron variants. Second would be all throughout the pandemic and even before the Delta surge of COVID-19, many Filipinos were already struggling with the need to secure food for themselves. This is in light of the insufficient and often delayed subsidies from the government, either from the national or the local levels. And this problem with food insecurity prompted an ordinary Filipino citizen with the name Ana Patricia Non to set up a so-called community pantry in a random street here in Quezon City in the National Capital Region. The said first community pantry started with a plain bamboo cart filled with goods, and you can see that in the slides. It's a super simple bamboo cart with basic food items, and it had a placard that read in English, "Give based on what you can and take according to what you need." So the items in this cart are totally free, and it is refilled. It's refilled every day based on donations from other people. So what seemed like a small act of charity actually started a wave of volunteerism and solidarity nationwide, with individuals from all walks of life setting up community pantries of their own in order to help fellow Filipinos survive. So this was seen as one of the citizen-led initiatives in order to respond to the inadequacies of the government. However, this humble initiative was not without its setbacks. Particular among the challenges that the community pantries faced back in 2021 were the baseless red tagging attempts by certain government officials. By red tagging, it means to say that certain government officials believed or accused that these community pantries were being used as recruitment mechanisms for left-leaning or communist groups. But of course, these are not true. But still, the establishment of these community pantries, again, shows what ordinary citizens can do if they come together and try to make a solution to address inadequacies in terms of the government's pandemic response. Third would be another key development in terms of the Philippine pandemic response was the official rollout of the vaccination program in March 2021. But this was not without issues as well. Even before the official rollout of vaccines in March 2021, there were already reports from 2020 that some high-ranking government officials have already received vaccines of their own, even without the official implementation of vaccination in the country. And the acquisition of vaccines was another problem, wherein, for example, the Philippines was supposed to get a particular brand of vaccine but ended up getting another because the National Health Department had lapses in terms of processing the acquisition. The actual rollout of the vaccines was also marred with issues, and it was also met with hesitation, particularly from anti-vaccine groups, whose sentiments were largely fueled by the dengue vaccine, Dengvaxia, issue that faced the country in 2018. At present, the country is still quite below its full vaccination target of 90 million Filipinos before the end of the incumbent president's term, but we've been seeing improvements in terms of the rollout. Vaccines have become more available. It's easier to get a vaccine now as compared to before. And vaccine hesitation has relatively lowered compared to the start of the rollout. Another pandemic-related issue would actually be corruption. Another key issue that broke out in 2021 was the so-called Formally scandal involving government deals for overpriced medical supplies worth billions of pesos with a barely known company or firm named Formally Pharmaceutical Corporation. Not only did Senate investigation show that the company lacked the credibility and the financial standing to be able to handle these huge multi-million government procurements, but the investigations also showed that officials and personalities linked to the Philippine president had some forms of involvement in the controversy and in the said deals. Apart from the obvious issue of corruption due to anomalous transactions, which could have been used to finance other aspects of the pandemic response, the formally corruption issue has also led to certain conflicts between branches of government, particularly the executive and the legislative branch. For one, the Philippine president himself has been actively defending the people who are close to him, who got involved or implicated in the issue, while the Senate, on the other hand, asserted its constitutional mandate to conduct investigations on the said issue. Two key formally officials are already detained at present, but the issue remains far from over. The investigation remains far from over. So moving from the pandemic and to another probe, another key probe that shaped 2021 in the Philippines was when the International Criminal Court, or the ICC, announced in September 2021 that it is set to start an official investigation on the Philippine president's so-called war on drugs, which has resulted to thousands of extrajudicial killings since its beginning in 2016. Despite the Philippines' withdrawal from the ICC in 2018 and the explicit refusal of the Philippine president to cooperate with investigations on his deadly crackdown against illegal drugs, the ICC maintains that it has jurisdiction to investigate the crimes committed within a member country while it was still a member. This move by the ICC was met with support from human rights groups, but also apprehension and even denial from those who continue to support the anti-illegal drug campaign in the Philippines. At present, the said probe has not yet proceeded given the deferral request from the Philippine government in late 2021. So apart from these issues surrounding the Philippine pandemic response, corruption issues that are still related to the pandemic, and key developments such as the ones involving the probe of the ICC, key events in the Philippines in year 2021 that shaped or continue to shape 2022 would be the preparations and events leading to the May 2022 presidential elections, which is actually 3 days from now. Okay, so even if the official campaign period was scheduled in February 2022, election season, so to speak, began in October 2021 with the filing of certificates of candidacies, or COCs, for both national and local positions. It is said that more than 18,000 national and local seats are up for grabs in the polls 3 days from now. A key issue that emerged during the COC filing week from October 1 to 8, 2021 was the unprecedented number of substitutions and withdrawals for different positions. Under current election rules, candidates who filed their certificates of candidacy may withdraw from the race at any time, whereas substitution can occur under certain conditions, and one of these would be disqualification. But what's bizarre about this year's or this election season was the number of voluntary withdrawals and substitutions that happened within the filing period and until the November deadline. So the filing period occurred in October 2021, but the deadline for substitution was in November 2021, a month after. So what are examples of these um, um, candidate substitutions and withdrawals that happened? For example, key allies of the president filed their certificates of candidacies for president and vice president. They belong to the majority party and the party of the president, but eventually they withdrew their certificates of candidacies, leaving the party of the president with no standard bearer in this coming elections. Another thing would be the president himself, President Duterte, filed his certificate of candidacy for senator, but he eventually withdrew his candidacy also. And third one would be the president's own daughter, who filed her certificate of candidacy as mayor for re-election in Davao City in Mindanao, but she eventually withdrew her candidacy for mayor and got substituted for another candidate in order to run as vice president. So these kinds of substitutions, because they are allowed by rules, they are allowed and they usually happen at the local level. But some say that this is the first time that this has happened at such a huge scale at the national level. And this has raised questions and concerns regarding the electoral rules, particularly including the calls to amend the election code to ban voluntary candidate substitution, since this incident shows how this rule can be abused and bent by politicians who may have vested interests in their own. In relation to the elections as well, as mentioned, while the official campaign period began in February 2022, pre-election campaign activities were already occurring prior to that. However, the Commission on Elections, or the COMELEC in the Philippines, is relatively weak in terms of regulating so-called premature campaigning activities. And candidates for different positions, particularly national ones, started to stage motorcades and tours around cities and provinces during this time. And candidates also adopted more creative ways of campaigning, prematurely campaigning, and even officially campaigning, given certain pandemic restrictions, mostly through the use of social media. And it was during this time that COVID-19 numbers were relatively low following after the Delta surge and before the Omicron surge, which gave candidates the room to gather sizable crowds, which was previously disallowed under stricter lockdown classifications. So these pre-election campaign activities actually relate to the bigger issue of the inability of the COMELEC to be able to regulate possible election violations such as premature campaigning. So as for the last issue, and in relation also to the elections, and another key issue within this election craze in late 2021 and even now until 2022 would be the spur of disqualification cases filed against the presidential bid of former Senator Ferdinand Bongbong Marcos Jr., son of the late dictator Ferdinand Marcos Sr. There were 3 consolidated cases filed against Marcos Jr. There were multiple cases, but the COMELEC consolidated them into 3. And they had different areas of concern, but the most talked about was his failure to file income tax returns and his conviction for it because he failed to file his income tax returns from 1982 to 1985, which should have resulted to perpetual disqualification from office. Different divisions of the Commission on Elections have already dismissed these disqualification cases, but appeals have been filed. in relation to this. However, similar to the issue on candidate substitutions and withdrawals, it is believed that this is also the first time that a presidential candidate has been at the receiving end of so many disqualification cases filed against him. And in a way, this is related to the bigger issue of allowing another member of the Marcos family to return to power, particularly running for the presidency, given their family background and lack of acknowledgement over the crimes and atrocities committed during their father's dictatorship. So for the most part, 2021 was a year wherein the Philippines continued to struggle with the effects of the pandemic, whether in healthcare, the economy, and even education. But I was not able to talk about education in depth in this short presentation. But preliminary steps towards recovery, particularly economic recovery, have also been undertaken in the past year, and they continue to be undertaken in 2022. This is primarily through loosened restrictions and opening up of the country's borders in order to bring more tourists in and in order to get more businesses running. This is especially in light of the record high debt that the Philippines has incurred. And it was also during the past year that, aside from dealing with the effects of the pandemic, trying to recover from the pandemic, people have started to talk about and prepare for the upcoming elections. So just to end my presentation, since the Philippines is 3 days away from choosing its next leaders, all in all, it can be said that daunting issues and heavy responsibilities await the next administration in relation to the aforementioned challenges we have faced in the previous year. And as I keep emphasizing, primary among these would be steering the country towards pandemic recovery. And of course, other related challenges such as strengthening our institutions, protecting human rights, and the like remain important. So that ends my short presentation this morning. Again, thank you very much for this opportunity to present these updates. And as we say in Filipino, maraming salamat po. Thank you.
For that presentation, Elize, and it's such a shame that we couldn't have you reflect on the results of the upcoming election, but the timing just didn't quite work there. I'd like to open up the floor to questions if we have any from the audience. Okay, so there's one at the back there and then at the front here.
Hey, Maria, I'm Arvin and I'm a Filipino as well. You mentioned about the issues on how the government handled the pandemic, but I am for fair representation. So please, can you also comment on the positive side of how the government handled the pandemic, especially that there was this instance that the president's satisfaction rating reached 70% to 80% during the height of the pandemic. So what are we missing on that page? Especially that you've mentioned how the government mismanaged or mishandled the pandemic.
Did you catch that, Elize?
It's I didn't hear much of it.
The question was about commenting on the positives of the COVID-19 response from the government and the increase in the approval ratings that the government saw during that time.
Positives. So I need to comment on the positive sides of handling the pandemic. Okay. Because for the most part, I think one of the things that the people liked about the president's pandemic response was it was consistent with his disciplinarian style, which actually helped a lot in his election in 2016. I presented the paper on this last November regarding the militarized pandemic response of the Philippine government. And I think I can't really say that it's positive, but from my perspective, I think this is what the people liked about the pandemic response, that people were forcibly kept inside their homes, thus showing discipline amongst themselves. But in terms of the actual aspects of responding to the pandemic, such as closing borders early, giving social aid, the rollout of the vaccines. There were a lot of lapses there, but all right. Maybe the vaccination rollout is quite impressive right now, because it's so easy to get a vaccination appointment now as compared to before. So maybe that kind of improvement, I think, would be one of the positive things that have emerged from 2021 moving to 2022.
Okay, thank you for that response. We've got another question here for you.
Hello, Maria. I have a question. If you could speak a little bit about the role of the press, because I know ABS-CBN got dismantled and its license got revoked. But on the other side, we've seen Ms. Reza get the Nobel Prize for her work with Rappler. So how is the latest development in the press and the media covering issues like Bongbong and then issues of corruption? And what's the press like at the moment? Is it still a dangerous place to be as a journalist, as it was, or have things improved? You could speak to that a little bit. Thank you.
Okay, so in terms of the role of the press, well, first of all, we really felt the effects of the shutdown on ABS-CBN, which is the country's biggest network, especially in terms of its regional coverage. I'll just give an example that when the Philippines was hit by a major typhoon in December, we really felt the absence of ABS-CBN regarding their coverage in terms of calls for help, calls for assistance, and status regarding the affected areas. In terms of the status of the press and how they're covering the elections, the elections are pretty much adequately covered because different members of the press belonging to different stations and outlets have been following the different candidates. But it is particularly in the case of Bongbong Marcos that there are issues regarding him not entertaining media questions from the media, especially except for those coming from a station that he obviously favors. So there's that one issue wherein all the rest of the candidates are pretty much open to being covered by the press, and except for Bongbong Marcos, because many journalists have spoken up about this, that they find it very difficult to secure questions from him, and his interviews are very filtered depending on the media outlet that's interviewing him or asking questions from him. And what else? I think another related issue there would be the role of social media, and we've been seeing here in the Philippines that those who have been pretty much exposed to social media, particularly fake news, have been discrediting the what they call the mainstream media. So that's, I think, a related issue that we're facing here. That even though the traditional media outlets have been adequately covering the Philippine elections, there's that related issue of alternative sources of information regarding the elections coming from vloggers or social media influencers.
There was a second part to the question about safety for journalists. Elise, is it a dangerous place to be a journalist at the moment?
I don't have the statistics right now, but there have been cases wherein journalists were attacked or harassed. But I think the Philippines is still among those countries which is not the best place to be in for journalists. But for this election season, I think there have been little cases of journalists being harassed. But for the entirety of the administration, there have been many instances of harassment and attacks against journalists, physical attacks against journalists.
Thank you. Was that a question?
Hello, thanks for the presentation. Just a quick one. Why is it that our Southeast Asian countries like ex-corrupt dictators like Malaysia, like Najib, like Bang Marcos? Anyway, I'll keep it up to you. But what is more interesting is what is the relationship now with China? You hear hot and cold. Your president at first, says, "Oh, I'm going to plant a flag in the island. I'm going to, the early part of it." Then the pandemic time, and then China gave you Sinovac, and there's a lot of investment. One of your islands is, there was a Australian documentary that says that it has been surrounded by the Chinese Navy, and
So your question is about the attitude towards China in the Philippines?
that's right, and also the investment. All right.
Okay, thank you.
So, is it okay for me to ask for what the question is all about?
Oh, sorry. It was on the attitude towards China and Chinese investment within the Philippines.
I think the Philippine president has been pretty much consistent with his friendly attitude towards China, whether it's in terms of them exhibiting presence over our territories, particularly the waters, or Chinese investment. So that's my general answer to it, that it's still pretty much consistent with his overall stance towards China, that he's maintaining friendly attitudes with them. And it seems like there's nothing really significant being done against or in terms of blocking Chinese investments in the country.
Thank you. All right, we've got another question here for you.
Hi, Dr. Elize. Thank you for your presentation. I was wondering, given the family history of the Marcoses, could you explain, or could you talk on maybe why bonbon is so popular now?
Okay, so it has a lot to do with nostalgia over the so-called golden years of his father's time, and Bongbong Marcos's campaign is actually hinged on authoritarian nostalgia, and trying to bring into people's minds what has happened back then. Of course, excluding the human rights violations, but all the infrastructure, all the developments being developed back then. And apart from that, it is said that the Bongbong Marcos camp has actively engaged in historical revisionism attempts, particularly through social media. And these attempts to whitewash or to rebuild the image of their family and to erase memories of the human rights violations that have occurred during the 70s and 80s are actually years in the making. These attempts through social media did not only happen now in 2022 or even in 2021, but it has been years in the making. So apart from nostalgia, there have been really active attempts to rewrite or to rewrite history or revise history in terms of people's perceptions. And social media really has a huge role to play regarding that. Vloggers and YouTube content creators have been tapped to make content regarding the good sides or the positive sides of the Marcos dictatorship. And just to end, Bongbong Marcos's campaign is actually founded on that he will try to bring back whatever prosperity that we've had during his father's time. So I think that explains his popularity.